Christmas special, yeah!
Today's episode, it's in English, but you should follow us on, where are we now? We are on YouTube, that's the main channel if you want to comment. And we also have a few podcast directories, such as
Castbox,
Spotify, Apple Podcasts,
Google Play.
Yeah, and there's one more, I don't know which one. There's one more. All the links are on our website.
I think the missing one is just the RSS feed.
Oh yeah, and go visit our website on podcast2030.com. All of our episodes are there. Of course, it does help if you know a little bit of Hungarian, but have fun nonetheless.
Okay, so today's special Christmas topic is about the fourth planet in our solar system. Okay, so the reason for us discussing Mars, of course, is the big news about the new Mars lander called InSight, which just landed. So first of all, it's a bit further from the sun than our planet, and the distance between the two planets vary, of course, because of the elliptic orbits of the planet. So the minimum distance can be 50 million kilometers and the maximum can be 400 million kilometers.
How much is that compared to, let's say, the moon or something?
I don't know the moon, but what I know is the distance between the Earth and the Sun. That's 150 million kilometers. So it can be the third of that, or it can be twice as much, depending on it can be that they are on the opposite side of the Sun. So then that's when the distance can be twice.
Right. But actually it's quite far then.
It's quite far. And then this is one of the interesting things. So then every 2 years and 2 months there's like a window to launch something towards Mars, which will take minimal amount of energy, as they say, because every 2 years and 2 months the planets kind of align, like they are close, and then you can launch something. Then it takes less fuel and it's more efficient to launch a mission to Mars. So that means, which is super interesting, I didn't know that, but that means that, for example, if you want to launch something and one of your instruments or your rocket is not ready yet, like you miss the deadline, then you miss the launch window and then you will have to launch 2 years. 2 years from now. So it's a risky business doing this exploration to Mars.
Now I'm thinking, when was the last window? Was about 3 years ago, right? Or 2 years and 9 months or something like that ago.
No, the last window was the one. So actually a trip to Mars with the current technology takes around 7 months. So the last window was this year between May and June.
Oh, so that's why it landed now.
Yes, and that's when they launched the InSight lander, and it landed on November 26th, I think.
Right. By the way, there is a Wikipedia article called Relative Similarity of Mars to Earth.
Yes.
Then all of this is nicely explained.
Yes, and I think we should talk about that because there's a lot of interesting facts which I didn't know.
Before we do, I'm just thinking that actually maybe I got a little bit sloppier with my news delivery about space. But I don't think there was that much media hype about this one, the new lander, as it was about the rover. What was the name of the last rover? Curiosity.
Yeah.
Because that's a rover, of course, so it moves around. It's much more exciting. So, but then I guess that Curiosity was one launch window ago or 2 launch windows ago.
Yeah, that's 3 launch windows before. So the thing is, I think you're right that there was some media coverage, but maybe the bar goes down. People don't get so excited about another Mars mission when it's just a lander. And when there will be a human mission, again, people will be super excited because that's new frontiers. Something which haven't been done before.
You're jumping ahead. So do you think there will be a human mission?
Of course.
So first of all, when, obviously, but the when is kind of like fusion power. It's always 5 years in the future since 2010 or maybe earlier. But is it going to be private or is it going to be government-led? This is the tricky one, I think.
Yeah, that's the tricky one. I think it will be private because governments have a lot of problems and it's really hard to justify reallocating money from some services to space exploration. It's hard to defend. I mean, you can do it, but you will lose to another candidate who says, I'm going to put everything in healthcare.
And I'm going to build a wall with the money.
and I'm going to build a nice wall around the country. What do you think?
So I think it will be private, but because I agree in the current political atmosphere, it's very difficult to sell. However, it's tricky because I think we are kind of assuming that if it's a government, it's either the US or Russia, one of the established space explorers. At the same time, I'm thinking that it's perfectly possible to imagine that a Chinese government, for example, might go to Mars, which is very much the same how sort of the Soviet Union was exploring Mars as a national pride goal.
That's true. Nations are super different.
The private one is tricky because then, in order for it to be private, it has to produce a profit. In this case, what can the profit be? It's either actual tourism, which worked for space for a while, or it has to be sort of exploring goods. So you would have to mine something on Mars to sell it back here on Earth, or create a new space economy. Or you have to be so rich that you can just basically waste a Mars mission's worth money for only pure PR purposes.
That's really interesting. I never thought of that what's the actual profit, like what's the benefit? Of course, I see a lot of benefit for humanity and explorations and being a multi-planet species and all those kind of things, but at the end of the day, it's always so did we make a profit in this financial year or in this quarter? And then PR value, like I'm the company who did it. I trust a company who can put a man on the Mars.
If you remember when Elon Musk sent the Tesla into space, I think that was sort of one of the most prominent examples of that, just because we can. So, screw it, we do it.
Yeah, but the cost of that was way less than a manned Mars mission.
Of course. Yeah. And I think for the mining argument is also not that strong, because there's several companies who are setting up to mine the moon commercially, but then the distances involved with Mars is just too. However, do you think that there might be potentially a future demand from colonists to sustain an economy on Mars? So basically you set up a company to build a habitat on Mars because you expect that in the future there will be demand from actual colonists. And then you have a massive first mover advantage, right? You have everything there.
That's a very long-term investment.
That's true.
But yeah, I don't know if I would buy some Mars stocks. But
yeah, Marsland.
And that's something which is, I tried to read a bit about it. And so what are the rules? What are the laws? Like if one company lands on Mars and it says, okay, I landed in this nice spot and it's mine. So if the next mission comes and they want to land into my area, they need to ask for my permission, or...
I don't know, there is something called space law, which basically regulates all of the other celestial bodies' territories. I think it's something like, I might be wrong at this, but I think it's something like international waters. So if you have a ship in international waters, I'm not sure what happens if you found a new land. And let's say an undersea volcano erupts, and then you put a flag on it. I don't know actually how that works.
The thing is that these laws, these international waters and space treaties, these work perfectly fine until there's some money involved. Like, there's some oil in international waters. Oh, suddenly I'm building an island and it's mine. Oh,
yeah, exactly.
So,
but actually, I just looked it up, and there's something called the United Nations Outer Space Treaty.
Yep.
Signed in 1959, but it only covers the major space nations: Russia, US, Japan, China, Canada.
They can do something which is against the treaty. Like, they don't have to respect this.
That is true. Yeah. But then basically this treaty says that you cannot make a claim on land, but it also says that only a state cannot make a claim. So yeah, effectively a company is exempt. Yeah, a company can say that this is...
So I think this is like laws regarding... This will change. So I think this is a good time to start preparing for a lawyer on Mars, because there will be a lot of new cases without precedents. So yeah, interplanetary law, that should be a degree. They should start thinking about that.
I was telling you about this PR stunt, and nobody really knows if it's true or not. There's a project called Mars One, and what they did is, I think in the beginning of the 2000s, 2011, 2012, something around there, they made a massive PR campaign, essentially, where they flooded all the media with the following: that they will have a lottery, and if you sign up to their lottery, they will choose I think, a couple of colonists, maybe 10 colonists, and then these colonists will get a one-way ticket to Mars. So they are developing habitats that they would actually, in batches, send to Mars, and then 10 people. Of course, we can discuss later that the logistics of coming back, because you'd have to build a rocket that takes off from Mars, is much more difficult than just building a one-way rocket.
Yeah.
So then they said, okay, we're going to deliver these people to Mars one way. People paid a sign-up fee, and then the company said that they're going to make profits by running a reality TV show out of the lives of the of the people on Mars. So it's like a Big Brother on Mars. And then there was a lot of hype. There was a lot of hype for like a year or two, maybe more.
Yeah, I remember.
And then now if I start searching after the company, they have a Twitter account. It's active. They have a website, but it looks the same for the past 5 years. Nothing real tangible. So I'm not sure what's going on, but everything has been just eerily quiet. So it might have been a nice PR stunt, pick up all these deposits from the people, and then they will silently fade away.
But were there applicants? Are there people who are willing to sign up for this, or there are people willing to sign up for anything? So
I remember they had like hundreds of applicants. But basically, this is also an interesting idea that you could finance it through media as well. So you could make a TV show. And then if enough people watch a TV show, you could convince enough companies to advertise in your TV show.
Yeah, that's true. But
I mean, everybody would watch a Mars landing. So
that's true. Everybody would watch a reality show from Mars. It's just, if that happens, that tells something sad about our society. That the only way we could finance a human Mars mission is through television and advertising.
I think that's pretty accurate. That's a pretty accurate description of society. So,
related to this, it just popped into my mind that I read a cool thing on 9gag. It said that probably in the future, when someone is calling you on the phone, before you can pick it up, you have to watch an ad.
This is cool. I saw a movie, and I don't know which movie was it. There was a concept called ad buddy in it. Basically, what this means is that if you want to get a coffee, somebody can come and read ads for you while you are having your coffee, and this pays for your coffee.
So you monetize someone else's attention, not your attention. This is like indirect. Attention monetization.
Yeah.
That's
cool. That's pretty smart. I think it will come soon.
Going back to the InSight mission, I read a bit about this mission, and probably part of why it wasn't so advertised or not so prominent in the media could be that it's harder to understand what the mission is about, and it's more like sciencey and not that exciting. I think it has 3 main instruments, and the job for the mission is to basically detect, measure the temperature below the surface, like the temperature of Mars, and then place a very sensitive seismometer so they can detect like how shock waves travel in the core of the planet. And they said that that's because Mars is like a very interesting planet because of its size. Because small planets like our moon, they don't have any volcanic activity. So the surface is very old. It doesn't tell us anything about the past. The Earth is a huge planet, so it has like a very active core because of all the gravity crushing the core together. And it has a lot of volcanic activity, so the surface changes a lot. So again, it doesn't tell us a lot about the past. But Mars is like kind of in between, so the main goal of this mission is to have some measurements, some data from which they can approximate how is the core of Mars. Is it active? How was in the past? There's a possibility that there's water on Mars, but it's underground. And now if this lander with the equipment measures that the temperature there is around 0 degrees, then it might be plausible. But maybe it's around, I don't know, minus 25, and then it's not plausible at all. Then it will be frozen ice. So these are the kind of goals of the mission, but it's more related to geology, and it's hard to PR these kind of things.
Yeah, but this is, of course, from a general science advancement point of view, in terms of understanding how Earth evolves and how other planets might evolve, it's very crucial. But yeah, it's, as you said, it's not as marketable. I'm just looking that actually they don't know if the Mars core is liquid or solid.
They don't know that Mars doesn't have a magnetic field, so probably it's not like a rotating liquid core, because I think that gives Earth's magnetic field.
Yeah. It's like an engine.
But other than that, they don't know. And there was another interesting thing which I read, is that the Mars atmosphere it's too thick to just land simply, because you will burn up in the atmosphere. So you need to use a heat shield. But then it's too thin to use a parachute to slow you down, because there's not enough atmosphere to slow you down. So landing in Mars is super tricky, because they start with a heat shield which slows down the lander. Most of the energy is stopped by heat, and then they drop the heat shield, they deploy some parachutes, they try to slow it down more, but there's not enough time to slow it down enough, so then they drop the parachutes, and then they fire like retro rockets to even more slow it down, and then they use some radar system to detect the ground, and then coordinate with the rockets to make like a super smooth landing. So it's very, very tricky to land on Mars, because of this atmosphere which is not too thin but not too thick.
And man, it has to be fully automated, right?
And that's the other thing, like radio signals to travel to Mars and back takes 7 minutes. So there's no way to have real-time control. So everything has to be pre-programmed and handled by the onboard computers. 7 minutes of terror, they call it, until you get a signal. Like once the lander enters the atmosphere, it's gonna disappear for 7 minutes, and then after that you either get a signal that everything okay, I landed, or maybe you don't get any signal at all.
I remember there was maybe the first rover on Mars, Pathfinder mission, and then there was a rover called Sojourner, and then I think when these, I'm not sure if it was the first, but one of the earliest in the 90s, these landed with an airbag, but basically a bouncy ball. So they remember
that's another
remember
technology,
this one, like... they definitely had the slowdown with the parachute and everything, but in the end they had no rockets. It was just a bouncy ball.
No rockets. They do tough job. They call this EDL, entry, descent and landing, which is the tricky part to put something safely on the surface.
It just says Earth's atmosphere is 100 times denser than Mars's atmosphere. And also because the planet is smaller, you will only experience 1/3 of your weight.
Yeah, that would be a cool thing to experience.
So that's awesome.
Probably you can jump very high and very far. Like maybe in the future it will be so, like, what's the long jump record? And they will ask, but on what planet, man? Probably there will be a human mission. Probably in our lifetimes. Maybe there will be a colony, there will be cities, there will be jobs there, there will be vacations there. So let's say, what would be the shortest vacation that you can take to Mars? So let's say that there's a window coming up next month and you sign up for it. Then your journey takes 7 months, plus you have to stay there until the next window, which is 2 years and 2 months.
Let me interrupt you there, because can't you... Are the windows not symmetric? And then I'm thinking that probably because the way that the planets move, the Earth to Mars window is not necessarily occurring at the same time as the Mars to Earth window, because one planet has to be ahead of the other when you launch to get this this window correctly. So
it's complicated, but let's say that it will take 2 years. Like, you cannot... Who wouldn't want to post a selfie from mountains or craters from Mars?
I'm just looking at the data transfer rate of Curiosity. 256 kilobits download, 2000 kilobits upload. So actually that's not too bad.
Yeah, probably it will be hard to do a vlog from Mars.
This is the company that we should invest in. An interplanetary communications company. Probably there actually are several players who are actually looking at it.
You build out the infrastructure and then to lend it to all the others.
Yeah, exactly. So let's talk about the very first colonists, if these are people. Because of what you said, well, we have to consider the two cases separately, of whether we leave them there or we want them to come back. Because if you want to come back, you have to build a rocket which takes off from Mars.
I mean, maybe you can tell them that there's a chance that you can come back, even if that chance is very low, but I think it will be very hard to convince people to go there when you say it's 0 chance. Like, once the rocket took off from Earth, like, if you don't give hope, I think, like, psychologically people will go mad. Or
I think there's always crazy people who are jumping into anything.
Yeah, but I don't know if you would want
them to be
a crazy person in your first colonist.
But this is tricky because you can tell them that we are confident that if you help this program with your deed, then this will help us gather enough funding that will reduce the cost of travel, let's say within 5 years, to bring you back.
Yeah, and I think that's good. If you say something like that, maybe people will be more likely to sign up.
Because I think it's plausible. So the first one will definitely, even just like with the moon landing, the first landing just unleashed a large stream of funding. So if you're actually successful, probably there will be more funding to come. By the way, we have been on the moon 50 years ago. Have you ever thought about that?
Yeah, that's true. It was 69 and now it's almost 19. Yeah. There's many, I read a bit about the missions, and there are many missions planned for the next launch window in 2020. Mm-hmm. And then they say that some companies plan to send people in the following one.
But don't you think this is actually, I mean, I understand that there's a lot of programs. Don't you think it's still a bit too optimistic to consider that within our lifetime Mars will be a run-of-the-mill place to go? Because if you go back to the 50s, when people actually haven't been to the moon yet, but it was already very much in the air that space exploration is the new thing, and it was obviously the space race between the US and the Soviet Union. When they had to present 50 years into the future, let's say the year 2000, they thought, yeah, we would basically pop onto the moon for a coffee and back. And then actually we never went back after the mission. So I think it was a mistake by default that the commercial angle was never exploited. Once the government has proven that they can go there, as you say, there is no incentive to keep doing it. So difference this time is that there are private companies who are exploiting it. Because once you have a private company that can sustainably make profit, then
there's nothing to stop it.
There's nothing to stop continuous missions.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And it's the same to Mars. Like, it's very expensive to send a human, and the things that we want to do on Mars so far can be handled very well by robots. So it's.
But wait. You say that actually in 5 years there are private companies who want to send humans to Mars. You need to build infrastructure there. I mean, are you going to carry everything with you to just chill there? You have to build your habitats. You bring the suits, the food, everything.
That's why the next window in 2020, that will be the one that brings many supplies there.
Pre-supply mission.
Pre-supplies a bit, and then 2 years are not wasted because the machines there which you send can start slowly building out something. Like, the 2 years are not totally wasted. Once you start with some resources there and some like automated robots, you can use that time actually to build out something.
What are the crucial services that, let's say the first robots, what are the key services that they will do?
I mean, you would need to build a safe environment because of the pressure, the radiation, and the lack of oxygen. So they will have to build out some shelter where people can live, and also the very low temperatures, and probably it will be something like a cave underground.
That's not a bad idea, actually, yeah.
But this is also another interesting topic, like how would these kind of trips affect people psychologically? Because you travel, let's say 7 months until you get there. That's a lot already. And then you go into a cave underground to survive, and every little mistake can cost your life because there's no one there to help you. Like, what if you need a doctor? What if you run out of some basic medicine which would be available on Earth? Like, super, super risky stuff.
But I'm actually more optimistic with that because I have 2 examples.
Yeah.
People have been living on the International Space Station for many months continuously. I think the record is more than a year. People are used to living in very, very tight environments. Of course, the space station is very close, so if something goes wrong, a rescue rocket can be sent to you and you can come back, or you can come back to Earth relatively easily.
But that's true. There were people living in confined space for a year and it was fine. So.
And then on the depression part, I think people who live on like submarines or oil rigs, or there's many kinds of jobs on Earth. So here's the trick. If it's a private company, then it's most likely gonna be the first person is not going to be a military person, or like a fighter pilot or something, which it was the case if it was, let's say, NASA who's funding the mission. So what is the kind of person who you would send? How do you conduct, okay, Andrea, tomorrow we're having the interview for Mars. What is the candidate profile that you're looking for?
I think that NASA tried some kind of experiments where they're locked people in an isolated room or house for many months to test how do they handle. I mean, that's one way to prepare, but yeah, I don't think it's like a 1 hour interview where at the end you're like, okay, this dude seems like he can take it.
Yeah.
So this brings us maybe to the next topic, which is a bit controversial but also quite interesting. So apparently NASA has a policy that it is forbidden to engage in sexual activity in space. And NASA says it's because it will kind of ruin the professional environment, and if someone gets pregnant, it would, of course, endanger the mission. And then I went down this rabbit hole because there was a link on Wikipedia to this sex in space, and then there's like a funny video which explains that actually sex in space is quite hard because whenever you push on the other person will fly away. So you have to tie the other person to the ship and yourself as well as a first step. Now there comes the second complication, because the gravity is not like on Earth. Your blood flow is different, so it's very hard to get an erection or get your sexual organs functioning normally. And the third one is that they measured on the International Space Station that the testosterone levels are very low for people on the space station, so it's hard to get aroused.
So this is tricky because, first of all, if you want to colonize, right, you will have to reproduce in space somehow after a while. On the 7-month trip, you can abstain yourself and just be very professional. But then if you're spending potentially years there, then yeah, you have to find a way. I think the sex in the airship itself is different from the sex on the other planet, because the other planet doesn't have necessarily all the complications that you are on the ship. So you're not fully weightless, but at the same time you will need a pressurized chamber, because otherwise you have to wear the pressure suit. So you have to have an environment which has breathable air. And
yeah, but let's say that you're on Mars and you're about to do it. You want to make a baby on Mars. So because of the gravity is 1/3 on Earth, does the sperm get into the womb normally? Maybe you can't even get someone pregnant the usual way. Maybe you have to do it in a laboratory. Like maybe you need to build an artificial womb to create children. Like maybe you cannot use the biology which is specific to Earth.
Okay, this is a big topic. Potentially a new episode. But do you think sex will disappear from humanity? And in the future, all of it will be artificial? So this question becomes an invalid question in 2100.
Oh man, that's an interesting one. They will have to figure out something, how to do this on other planets. But why would it disappear from Earth? Because there's a better way, artificially?
First of all, artificially, maybe you can just, as we discussed, you can design the baby that you want and you can just print it. But no, basically maybe I'm thinking it has already been shown that basically sex has been declining in the Generation Z times. So people are spending too much time in front of the screen, and that decreases your arousal levels. I'm not sure if this is sex for pleasure or sex for reproduction, but basically it has been declining steadily. So several people have postulated that with time we will replace the brain pleasures that the brain currently gets from sex with other activities, and then we will only look at it as sort of a reproductive act, but then it becomes a task. So then we would want to automate the task, and then we will automate it by potentially removing the human or making the interaction completely streamlined.
Whoa, that's an interesting idea. And I can totally see how that can be true because of all this new technology. You can get the dopamine shots and the same high from many other activities. For example, there could be drugs which make the same effect in your brain as an orgasm in the future. Yeah. And then you say, okay, flirting with someone and getting to the point where you get to have sex, it's too much effort. So maybe I just pop an orgasm pill and it's all done.
There's also an episode in Black Mirror where they have basically robots replacing the partners, and then it becomes a real problem that the robot performs much better. So basically, from there onwards, people will only want to have sex with robots because people are inferior.
Oh man!
So yeah, this can also be quite a deep rabbit hole. But if I had a company whose purpose is to colonize Mars, I think even now already the most cost-effective or sort of least resistance path might be through an artificial way.
That's another business idea.
Space incubator. We have the International Space Station, which has zero gravity, and then it has been there for like 20 years. I'm quite amazed that this hasn't been tried so far.
Yeah, that's true.
This is an important problem.
Yeah. I also read a bit about this, and apparently there was Pornhub wanted to do shoot a sex scene on the International Space Station, and they did a crowdfunding for that, but the money, like, they didn't hit the goal. They couldn't raise the money, so they didn't do it. But then there was another company which actually did it. But just to be accurate, I want to...
Oh, really?
So there was a private company, and they shot a movie called The Uranus Experiment. There they shot an intercourse scene in zero gravity, and that was accomplished with a plane,
with an airplane,
which went 3,000 meters, and then a steep dive, and then there was like a zero gravity for 20 seconds, and they shot a scene. So that was the only like experiment actually.
That's interesting. That actually the International Space Station is there, and
they're not using it. Yeah, they're not using it for science.
Do you know how are these planes called? The zero gravity planes?
No.
They are called the Vomit Comet.
The Vomit Comet.
For obvious reasons.
Probably it's really challenging.
So what are the new missions that are coming up?
I don't know exactly. What I know is that there will be a Chinese mission, a European mission, and another NASA mission as well in 2020. And then in the next window there will be a mission from India and also from Japan.
Let me ask you something else. What do you think about all these space agencies? Why not just have one and then manage the money together? I mean, for example, I know that the Europeans and the Japanese and the Canadians, they are collaborating with NASA and Roscosmos.
Mm-hmm.
But notoriously, the Europeans, whenever they have missions alone, they like totally crash land, or their rocket burns up halfway, or they screw something up. So what is your view on sort of, this is like managing national pride versus having your own assets? I don't think it's effective or it's efficient.
Yeah, it's not efficient at all, but I don't think it's just national pride, because actually many of the scientists at JPL or NASA are not from the US. They are immigrants, like super smart people who went there for a good career. So I don't think it's national pride. It's something with how people organize and how you have historical hierarchy structures which are very like resistant when it comes to change.
Yeah, probably that.
But you're right, like all these agencies could cooperate and then put their resources together and reuse things from each other, equipment, development.
And it's mostly sort of knowledge or know-how, because if you have sent 200 rockets, there's much more data, or it's the little things, of how many turns does this screw has to have, 5.5 or 6. A lot of this you only learn through failures. So Roscosmos and NASA has a lot of that. So the other agencies are at a disadvantage. And then notoriously the Chinese, for example, the Chinese don't cooperate with anyone. So they send their own missions and they fail, and then they learn from that, which is basically repeating the same process as the Russians and Americans went through in the 60s, the 70s.
It's kind of an ignorant approach, thinking that, okay, I'm gonna do it better than them without even knowing the details. Maybe they're not open enough about these things. Like they don't release all the documents describing the mission in detail or the equipment. Maybe they are like a bit in secret protecting their intellectual property, but I don't know if this is something, because the whole thing is not really profitable yet. It's all just exploration.
until very recently, space was very entangled with military objectives.
Yeah.
So the Americans and the Russians developed the space missions as a fun side project on top of deploying the 1,000 military satellites into space and then seeing how they work. So there's actually also a defense objective. It could be a defense objective for a non-cooperation. But also, what I'm just thinking now, competition might be good as well. I mean, after all, the moon landing was just because there was competition. Otherwise, they wouldn't have done it.
Yeah. So it's better to have multiple agencies.
But maybe 2, not 7, doing the same thing.
There are a lot of smart people. Maybe also there's like a rule that if an organization is too big, it's hard to coordinate. Like there's some rule how many people can effectively communicate, so it's good to put a limit like, okay, more than 500 people will not help, like we'll just slow the process. Or
so if you are a company and really the bottom line matters, you're going to be efficient, but this comes at a cost. So in space, safety is above everything. So how can you do it on a budget? And then you forgot to take the potato seeds and you're gonna starve.
Yeah, every mistake has huge consequences.
I don't know. So you think that in our lifetime it will be run of the mill to see people?
Yeah, I think it will be a thing that you can retire to Mars. Like probably housing will be cheap. Like you cannot afford to buy a house in London, but you can afford to buy a house in the capital of Mars, which I don't know how it will be called because it's cheap and risky. So, and maybe it's a good investment.
But you have to get there. How do you buy the space flight ticket? That's a major cost.
Maybe you can repay with your efforts there. Like you can take me to Mars and then I'll do the things that you want. Like I will help building a new swimming pool there.
Yeah, you need to expand the public services. The Mars government has to provide the public services.
It's interesting just to imagine maybe in the future there will be a nation or cities there or even a government. There will be many funny sequences. Like when you organize an event, you also have to say the planet.
The phone number has to have another code.
The planet code.
no phone calls with Mars though. So yeah, it's gonna be interesting. I remember when I think Doom is set on Mars, isn't it? The game Doom. You are in a facility, and when you go out, you always have to go through an airlock. So because in the facility you have like the earth pressure, and then you go through the airlock, and then it pressurizes, and then you put on your suit, and then you go out into the wild. And then I found that so fascinating that actually with the right tools, it is possible to make a completely normal life. You just have to turn it into your new routine. But just like you take an umbrella, you're gonna take your spacesuit. It's fine.
Yeah, that's true. Like humans are very adaptable. We can get used to many things. There are some people who decide to live on Antarctica in like science centers to do exploration. Of course, they can return home and probably these missions last, I don't know, a couple of years or like it's not your whole life. So I think there would be many people interested in trying it out just for the fun of it. So, or just to, I don't know, to brag about it or experience the new thing or
to Instagram.
To Instagram it. But you have to provide the possibility to return, because zero hope if you say that you're not gonna return. That's hard to take, or at least for me. Maybe some people are fine with that.
I think you're right, and I think you also put it very nicely that perhaps today Antarctica, the Antarctic research stations are the ones that compare the most. Because the journey to go to Antarctica is sort of comparable to go to Mars. And then also you have to spend a significant amount of time there, probably on a year scale.
And
especially if you're one of and it's cold, and especially if you're one of the researchers who stay over the winter in Antarctica. It's dark. It's super not friendly for humans.
Yeah, maybe
I think
that's
really nice. That's a really nice parallel.
Maybe that would be the training center. Like before going to Mars, there's like a 1 year prep at Antarctica.
Antarctica, yeah.
Like a Mars course, pre-Mars course.
Boot camp.
A boot camp for the colony.